Chapter 12. Put your loving hand out, baby. April 12th. The drive home from the concert was a blur, as was trying to get through the crowds of people without losing one another. Sirius was exhausted, probably from kissing Remus, if he had to wager, and demanded to be carried once they were in the parking lot and looking for the car, which ended up being one of the most challenging moments of Remus's life. Honestly, he didn't know that he had used his brain that much in his entire life. He was high as fuck, and James was as well, and Lily was, and Sirius was asleep over his shoulder, and no one could find the car. There were so many cars. Really, they were all just aimlessly walking around, throwing out general directions of where they thought the car might be, but it all looked the same, and it was dark and a fucking maze of hatchbacks and at least 12 other Vista Cruisers. The only saving grace, which actually just saved some pride, was that there seemed to be a handful of other people in the exact same situation. Sirius threw out the really helpful reminder that they had parked next to a black car, which was a great suggestion in theory. Still, then James had insisted it was a white car, and Lily said they would have, inevitably, parked next to two cars, because that's how that works, dumbass. So they wandered around while Sirius, who was thrown over Remus's shoulder, poked at the back of his waistband until they somehow found the car. He kept slipping back, Remus having to readjust and asking if he could just walk, to which he got silence and a smack to the ass, which definitely meant no. Remus's brain hurt, and his mouth was dry, and it felt like they walked for ages, passing the same few people, and by the third time James announced he had found the car that was not the car, everyone shut up. Eventually, Lily, bless her, saw something that jogged her memory. Most people had already found their cars and were trying to leave, but there it was, in a back corner, nowhere near where they had initially thought it would be. The car. He saw the car under the street lamp. It almost did look a bit gold, but it didn't matter because Remus about cried, his hands hurting from trying to keep Sirius from falling over his back, and his legs were fucking tired, and he wanted to sleep. Everyone fell inside and collectively sighed. Sirius more flopped and kind of hit his head. Remus mumbled an apology, before curling up in a ball against the window, throwing his feet in Remus's lap. His boot kicked Remus dangerously close to his dick, but Sirius had mumbled a sorry, so it was fine. Sirius woke up as they pulled into the apartment and parked, and tried his hardest to get out of the car. He really did. Everyone was sluggish, and the high was wearing off, but it had been too much going on for it to really go away. They all needed sleep, and the stairs to the apartment were daunting, to say the least. So high, he squinted at Remus as he stood before him, one eye closed. The squint turned into narrowed eyes, and Sirius was silent before nodding to himself. The most handsome. Okay, Remus laughed, fighting back a yawn. All right, let's get you inside. Want to look at you, Sirius mumbled, and want something to fucking drink. You can look at me once we get in bed. Sirius raised his brows at that, waggled them comically, slowly dragging his eyes away from Remus as he turned around and followed James and Lily into the house. He did a double take and glanced back at Remus before holding his hand out, waiting for him to follow. And then, walking up the steps, Sirius almost tripped as he turned around to look at Remus. And then, once they got to the front door, it seemed that the tripping and having to walk had woken him up enough to follow James and Lily to their bed, jumping to lie on the end of it as they crawled in. Remus went to empty his pockets on their bedside table before pulling out the 2 flyers he had snagged at the concert. He glanced at Sirius from the corner of his eye and how James was smacking him upside the head, and he pretended to fall over, mortally wounded, it would seem, by the tongue sticking out the side of his mouth. Remus walked over, fell onto the bed, and threw the flyers between the 4 of them. Everyone collectively squinted, leaning in. Mooney! Sirius gasped, slowly turning to look at him. No. Yes. Where did you find these? Sirius grabbed the queen one, shoving it towards Lily, who went wide-eyed, glancing at Remus. When? I grabbed them at the show, and the Queen one is the 18th. Bowie is the 29th. It was silent for a moment. Sirius grabbed the concert flyer for David Bowie before glancing at Remus, trying to suppress a grin. He looked proud, excited, a mix of both, like he was just delighted Remus had stolen public property and presented it to him like a little offering. Sirius froze, looking up between James and Lily. "Please go with us." And Remus had expected they'd say no, even though he did wish they would go with him, because he was quite fond of them now. But James only leaned forward, studying the papers real close before slowly turning to look at Lily. She was smiling, trying to hide it behind a hand, before James shrugged. "Okay." "Wait, really?" Lily took them from James, looking at the papers before chewing on her bottom lip for a moment. "We can go to the Queen one. The Bowie one, though. Babe, we have my sister's wedding the day before." "Fucking bitch," James said under his breath, and Remus choked on a laugh, leaning up to look over at him. Remus was met with wide eyes, James running a hand down his face as he spoke. "She is. She doesn't like me." "What a bitch," Sirius scoffed, as if it personally offended him as an extension of James, and, thus, Lily. He got a nod in return as Lily sat up, leaning her head in her hand, lolling side to side a bit, and she looked beautiful, as always, but exhausted. Remus rolled over, looking up at the ceiling, and threw a leg over the back of Sirius's thighs before he bent his knee, trapping Remus's leg. "When do we need to leave?" she asked. "'Cause I can throw some stuff in a bag if we need to leave as soon as possible. I don't know how long it would take to drive." Remus shook his head, fighting against Sirius's hold on his leg. Sirius laid his head back on the bed, turning to look at Remus. Their eyes met, and he looked sweet, tired and sweet. "If we want to get to Alabama by the 17th, then we need to leave tomorrow or the next day. Probably tomorrow. That way, we don't have to sleep in our cars." "No more sleeping in the truck," Sirius huffed. "We can follow you guys," James offered. "That way, there's room, and we can just find rooms at the same motel. Same trip, just 2 cars." "If we're leaving tomorrow, can we leave late?" Lily folded the flyer back up, tucking them under Remus's head. "We can sleep in. James is driving us, but I doubt we'll be up before 3 tomorrow." Remus looked up, shoulders dropping as he sighed, deep and heavy. His eyes were half closed, and maybe he was swaying a bit from being so tired as he stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. Toothbrush shoved in his mouth, Remus was trying, but it was hard. Technically, it still counted as brushing his teeth, though. Sirius was standing next to him, looking even more tired, and he closed his eyes, letting his head fall back and swaying side to side as he brushed his teeth. A hum left his throat before he spit in the sink, looking up at Remus. They just stared at one another, nothing behind the looks beyond just looking. Sometimes that was the best way to go about regarding someone, unbiased, just seeing, and Remus relished it because even then he couldn't help but love every single little thing he saw about Sirius. And if that was the case, it must all mean something. Sirius frowned, leaning over like he was going to fall, head resting on Remus's shoulder. "I'm waiting on you." "I can't brush my teeth when you're on my arm." "You're warm." "You're cold?" "Yeah." Sirius rolled his head, pressing his forehead into Remus's upper arm, shaking his head. "Maybe if you put a shirt on." He didn't even respond, just huffed a laugh. April 13th. Remus woke up alone, the bed cold beside him, which was fucking awful. But then he heard a noise. More precisely, Sirius's loud mouth and Lily arguing with him, apparently the way Remus liked to wake up as of late, and got out of bed, making his way into the kitchen. James was sitting at the table, smoking a cigarette and drinking a coffee, and pointed Remus towards the fresh pot before throwing his hands up. "Just bring it all, then!" "I just wanted to know what you think I should wear." Lily narrowed her eyes at him, tossing a real bright pink-looking bit of fabric on the table. James leaned his head back, sighing before smiling. "You look great in anything, love. Just pack what you want. We'll make it fit." "That's what she said." Sirius said under his breath, and Remus knocked the back of his head as he passed by him, sitting down next to James with his coffee. Sirius's eyes widened. Mooney is mean in the mornings. Did y'all know? I'm not mean, and it's not morning. It's... Remus squinted at the clock. Almost 4 in the afternoon. Sirius scoffed before setting down the shirt he had been folding, going over and flipping the record that had ended, and dropping the needle again. Morning is whenever you wake up. He tossed over his shoulder, and Remus took a sip of his coffee, which was entirely too hot, but Lily knew how to make a good pot of coffee. Hall and Oates floated through the air, and Remus gave a non-committal hum.
Baby hair with a woman's eyes. I can feel you watching in the night. All alone with me, we're waiting for the sunlight.
Mooney! Sirius gasped, coming to stand in front of him, stealing his coffee as he was about to take a sip and drinking it down, and Remus knew it burnt his tongue. Don't tell me you're not a fan of Daryl Hall. I didn't even say anything, Remus defended, snatching his coffee back from Sirius before getting up, going, and pouring Sirius his own cup. Didn't say anything.
When I feel cold, you warm me. And when I feel I can't go on.
Sirius narrowed his eyes at Remus before accepting the cup. Thank you.
You come and hold me. It's you and me forever.
And then they were back in the truck, and Sirius felt much better. He leaned over Remus, turning the radio up as loud as it would go, and then leaned even further across Remus, blocking him from seeing the road for a moment, to roll down Remus's window because only one was apparently insufficient. Then it was a glance out the back window, waving at James and Lily before lighting a cigarette, singing through it between his lips. And here's to you, Mr. Mooney, son. Sirius grinned as if he had just figured out a mystery of the universe. A wicked glint in his eye as he figured that one out. Jesus loves you more than you will know. And then he tossed the lighter at Remus, narrowly missing, smacking him square in the side of the head, which he did look slightly apologetic about before hitting Remus with the whoa, whoa, whoa part of the chorus, and Remus cracked a smile. He did, and it only grew as Sirius leaned back against the passenger window, kicking his feet onto Remus's lap.
God bless you, please, Mrs. Robinson. Heaven holds a place for those who pray.
He threw his head out the window, waving to Lily and James again, and shaking his hair out like he didn't have a care in the fucking world. And Remus didn't either, honestly. There was very little on his mind beyond that moment, just being. Sitting in the truck once again, on to the next adventure. Remus supposed that Sirius made life feel like an adventure. Big things like getting hitched in Vegas, and even the small things, like gas station stops and sleeping late. It had been a long time since they had been in that truck, but the difference in the air, the taste, and the quality seemed vast. It was different, a perspective of an added extra something. Remus was not sure what it was, but he gulped it down regardless, and could hardly keep a smile off his face.
Hiding in a hiding place where no one ever goes. Put it in your pantry with your cupcakes.
Sirius leaned forward, flopping his head into Remus's lap, laughing. The sound was carried out of the truck by that same fucking air, and it was a beautiful moment Remus thinks he will remember for the rest of his life. He looked down. Sirius's eyes were closed, and he looked like a dream.
It's a little secret, just the Robinsons affair. Most of all, you got to hide it from the kids.
And then Sirius reached up, gripping the steering wheel tightly to keep them from just running off the road, and one of his hands came behind Remus's head, and Sirius gave him the biggest kiss on the cheek, a smooch, if you will, and Remus let out a loud laugh, meeting his eye. Coo ka-choo. One more smooch on the cheek. Mr. Mooney son, Sirius loves you more than you will know. And wasn't that just the damnedest fucking thing? Sirius tossed a cigarette out and lit another, handing it to Remus before lighting one for himself. Someday, Sirius mumbled before taking a drag, I'll get you off those cowboy killers. He sighed dramatically, kicking his feet up onto the dash. He was wearing Remus's shorts and needed a fucking tan. The color of the seats made him look extra pale, the tattoos extra dark. Southern cuts. Reds are a classic, Remus defended, because, in truth, he much preferred Southern cuts because, well, they reminded him of Sirius. And, yes, he used to smoke them, but there had been a time where anything more than everything reminded him of Sirius was too much. Going to the store and buying into more pain seemed a bit overboard, but still, don't knock his cigarette preferences. Yes, but Southerns are sweeter, yes, Remus nodded, raising his brows and waiting. So I smoke those because I'm so sweet, Remus nodded, glancing over. Yes, we've established this. Sirius arched a brow, throwing one leg over the other where they sat, still on the dash. You think I taste sweet, Moons? So sweet, I've got cavities. Sirius only narrowed his eyes, trying to suppress a smile before nodding towards the radio again. Turn it up. And Remus did, and then looked at Sirius as the intro to the song started. And Remus knew what he was going to ask before he even spoke by the way he began to sway back and forth to the tune. So Remus sighed, dramatically of course, and squared his shoulder and once again sang. A song, and Remus wasn't a singer, but he supposed it was a well-known fact of the world that he would do just about anything for Sirius at this point. There was something always so mortifying about letting loose. It was hard. Hard to sing and scream and do whatever the fuck you wanted, as Sirius did, but Remus was still trying. Found he quite liked it when he gave it a shot. And he was no Rod Stewart, but he thought it was decent enough, and it was perfect if the look in Sirius's eyes was anything to go off. Back of his hand pressed to his lips, Remus watched the ash fall from his cigarette as he tried not to laugh. Remus really leaned into it, too, belting that shit out because if Sirius wanted him to sing, he would. Still, he would make it so terrible and unbearable that maybe someday Sirius would never ask again. But then, wouldn't that just be a shame? Remus took a drag of his cigarette, shaking his head as he sang to Sirius, hoping more than anything he understood the importance of what Remus was trying to give him right then.
It's late September and I really should be back at school. I know I keep you amused, but I feel I'm being used.
Sirius sang the next time, and see? They were just perfect together because they didn't even plan that. And here they were harmonizing to Rod Stewart singing about how he fucked an older woman for the first time.
Oh, Maggie, I couldn't have tried anymore. You led me away from home just to save you from being alone.
And then he pointed at Sirius, who swatted his hand before leaning his head on Remus's shoulder, looking up at him and singing the next line.
You stole my heart, and that's what really hurts. The morning sun, when it's in your face, really shows your age. But that don't worry me none. In my eyes, you're everything.
They stopped a little past 8 that evening to fill up on gas at a station off Highway 64. Sirius got more Pop Rocks, Lily got Fun Dip, and Remus thought they were just a match made in heaven. You want some? James asked, resting his head against the door, holding the joint out to Remus. The truck took twice as long to fill up as Jamie's car, and it was kind of cold out. He glanced at it warily. Smoking next to the gas pump is... Yeah, but we're on the other side of the car. Remus narrowed his eyes because No, he didn't want any because he didn't need any. But also, the logic was kind of sound. What constituted as next to the pump? Technically, they were next to the pump, but also not. Remus nodded anyways. Sure. Because James was a good guy, but always seemed a bit wounded by his turning down an opportunity to smoke with him, and Remus was also not one to turn down free weed. Moons, Sirius said, coming out with red-stained fingers and a handful of pop rocks already in his mouth, shoving around his pockets for a cigarette. He was wearing Remus's sweater again, and his heart did a little stutter. Something not good for his health, surely. Hotel? I saw one a few miles back, Lily nodded, sucking the fun dust off the stick and eyeing James. We can get a room and then find somewhere to eat. They ended up finding a motel on the outskirts of St. Louis for the evening that was actually really nice, and Remus grumbled until he remembered that they were spending Orion's money, which then made him want to buy out every single empty room for the night and throw money down the balcony because fuck him. The motel was conveniently near a club. Remus called it a bar, and then had been told by Lily that it was not a bar, but a club. And then Remus was sorry, which then led to everyone collectively deciding, fuck dinner, let's go to the club. So they hauled all their shit into their respective motel rooms, which is something Remus had not missed. It was all thrown on the bed, and then they had agreed to meet outside in an hour, which gave Remus sufficient time to shower and pick out the same pair of pants he always did and one of his handful of shirts, and then spend the other 20 minutes helping Sirius pick out what he wanted to wear and do the eyeliner thing, which was where Sirius currently sat, in Remus's lap, as he tried, once again, as hard as he always did, to achieve the perfect, effortlessly smudged eyeliner look that Sirius had become accustomed to by Remus's hand. He spoiled him, really. But also that Remus had come to love and hardly could complain about anymore. Sirius's eyes had always been a strange shade of gray, not quite enough color in them to be blue, but when surrounded by the eyeliner, the contrast made them fucking blinding, and now Remus was just staring at his eyes. He probably had a dreamy look in his eyes. He was hopeless. Moony, Sirius said, leaning back a bit. Moons? Stop moving. I'm trying to do the thing. You weren't doing the thing. You were just staring at me. Remus huffed. So that's still a problem? Touchy. Sirius rolled his eyes. We're supposed to meet them outside in 15 minutes. Well, Remus sighed, we would be on time if it didn't take you 30 minutes to get dressed. I don't think you want to scrutinize time right now, because I was ready for you to do my eyeliner. Sirius leaned in, holding his mouth open and his breath as Remus got back to work. 10 minutes before you were out of the shower. Sirius mumbled it, but Remus could see the corner of his mouth quirked up. I was not in the shower for more than 10 minutes. Remus narrowed his eyes, bringing a hand up to steady Sirius's shoulder. False. It was 15 minutes. Sirius drew back a bit, squinting. His nose scrunched, and when he opened his eyes again, they were a bit red. Almost blue, but never quite. Keeping tabs on me? Wondering why you were in the shower so long, actually. Remus laughed. Wouldn't you like to know? That's why I'm asking. That wasn't a question. You were musing, if anything. Why were you in the shower so long, Moons? 15 minutes is an average shower time. Remus finished the second eye, roughly smudging it as Sirius tried to pull his face away, swatting at his hand. He leaned back, studying Remus. Sirius glanced at his hair, and then his eyes, narrowed his own, and Remus watched them flit across his face, then to his lips, before raising his brows indifferently. Yeah, maybe if you wash your hair, but you did not. Sirius smirked before pushing Remus back on the bed and getting up. A handful of minutes later, they stood outside with James and Lily, and one thing became abundantly clear to Remus. You're underdressed, Lily hissed, throwing her hands out as if his outfit choice had personally offended her. Remus looked down at what he was wearing, which he had thought was pretty typical and acceptable. the jeans he always wore, the same boots he always wore, and one of Sirius's shirts. It was a really comfortable The Who shirt from when they were younger. He was surprised to still fit either of them. In his defense, Sirius was wearing a shirt that night, so he assumed there wasn't a dress code, and he thought he looked nice, which had been confirmed by Sirius before they exited the room. Still, upon further inspection, he took in Lily's bell-bottoms and white halter top. Giant earrings, and she had done her hair instead of letting it loose as it usually was. Bright lipstick, and yeah, okay, that was more dressy than him. Then there was James, who was wearing matching bell-bottoms and a very Easter-colored yellow shirt, but he was also wearing a hat, which made no sense to Remus because it was nighttime, and hats seemed a very daytime thing to him. And then there was Sirius, who also looked overdressed and like he had bigger and better places to be. It was in his nature, so yeah, of course, Remus looked a little pale in comparison. But now that he really took in Sirius's outfit, who was looking at Remus, admiring him like he thought Remus looked fine, Remus noticed that, okay, maybe, he was a bit underdressed. Sirius had opted for bell-bottoms as well, apparently. Remus needed a pair if everyone had them, which were black, and yeah, okay, Remus couldn't hate them because they were somehow tighter than the pants. And a white button-up, which was actually a nice color on him, was tucked into the pants. Sirius had thrown on his leather jacket, but Remus would admit he did look a bit more something than usual, and in comparison, Remus looked like he had just rolled up to the gas station after a long day of work. Whatever that meant. Then Remus sighed because there was the belt buckle, which was a new addition, and one Remus just knew Sirius had been hiding away in that suitcase full of shit for the right time to pull it out. Scheming and plotting, probably lying awake at night and rubbing his hands together, giggling like he had a master plan Remus was none the wiser to. Bright red letters, a reasonably large belt buckle, looked uncomfortable, if he were being honest, with the word tease on it. Or it wasn't even on it. That was just the entire belt buckle. That plus the eyeliner, and Remus stood no chance. Not one measly chance. He was out, sidelined. He sighed, gesturing to the motel room, dragging his eyes away from the belt buckle. I can go change. I think Mooney looks great, Sirius said to James and Lily, crossing his arms. Lily glanced at Remus again, then shot a look at Sirius. You're biased. Sirius threw his hands up. But I think you look fine, love, she said, knocking Remus's shoulder. Her earrings swung, and her lips were bright pink. I was just surprised. Well, I figure we were just going to a bar. Remus hated disco. That much should be abundantly clear, and something he had no shame in admitting. It wasn't for him. Maybe it was too much. He didn't really know, but he could appreciate it like any other person. Understood the scene. He got it. But the last place he would have ever expected to be was sat at a club in the middle of St. Louis, wearing what he was wearing, watching Lily, James, and Sirius dance in what they were wearing while listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire. Had not been something he'd ever considered would happen in his life. Yet, there he sat. And Sirius, God bless him, knew Remus hated disco, knew he loathed it something fierce, and that he rather listened to TV static than what was currently playing. But Remus downed his drink and grabbed the others from the bar, making his way over to them. And maybe he had set a bad precedent because, as he approached, Sirius, who was dancing as if his life depended on it, and it was everything Remus adored about him, wrapped up into the sway of his hips and hands in the air, he reached out, grabbing the drink from Remus before shouting over the crowd, "Dance with me!" And Remus hated disco. "I'm not drunk enough for that," Remus shouted, shaking his head. He couldn't fathom how drunk he would have to be to dance like everyone else was, but he wasn't trying to find out anyway. Then cheers, Sirius said as he grabbed Remus's chin, tilting his head back and making him drink his drink because, no, Sirius did not need a drink to dance because he loved dancing and was carefree and loved life. Remus would have to be offered at least $500 to even sway his hips in front of a group of people, he decided at that moment. But he sputtered and drank Sirius's drink before meeting his eyes. And there was his resolve, floating away from them all and up in the air and dispersing. And Remus would groan and complain for the rest of his life, but okay, fine, he would dance. And James and Lily were next to them, dancing as well. And everyone around them was dancing, wholly oblivious and unaware of the two of them standing still amongst the crowd. And Remus rolled his eyes before knocking back his drinks as well. He leaned over as the next song started, setting their drinks on a table, and took Sirius's hand. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. This moment probably fell somewhere amongst all that shit.
Where are those happy days? They seem so hard to find. I tried to reach for you, but you have closed your mind.
And to his great relief, Remus didn't have to do a damn thing, which was awesome because he hated disco, but he would take to his grave the fact that he didn't mind, per se, ABBA. But also, wasn't disco supposed to make you happy, want to dance? Was he that depressed of a person that he was there in a crowd of hundreds of people and ABBA was going to make him sad?
Whatever happened to our love? I wish I understood. It used to be so nice, it used to be so good.
But as he said, Remus didn't have to do a damn thing, because besides the mildly depressing song playing while everyone was acting like they hadn't a care in the world, Sirius spun around, so his back was pressed to Remus's front, pulled Remus's hands over his shoulders so they were around his neck, and just started dancing. It was quite a confusing situation, really.
When you hear me, darling, can't you hear me? SOS.
Sirius's ass was just all over Remus's dick, and it was about to be even more confusing if he got a hard-on listening to this in a crowd full of sweaty bodies. But also, wasn't that the point? It was a club, and probably 90% of the people there were high. He wished he was higher, and
The love you gave me, nothing else can save me. SOS.
Sirius leaned his head back, smiling as he looked up at the ceiling, and Remus tilted his head forward, pressing a kiss to the base of his neck, because Remus hated disco, but he loved Sirius, and if all he had to do was stand there while Sirius danced on him, he would not complain. That would just be silly.
When you're gone, though I try, how can I carry on?
But then, yeah, he was only human. Man, if you will. And Sirius's hot and sweaty body was just grinding all over him. And maybe Remus was a bit drunk. He could feel himself getting hard. There was just too much Sirius all over him. And it was a massive predicament because he didn't want to leave Sirius and miss out on this prime opportunity. Still, he also knew Sirius was bound to notice.
When you're gone, though I try, how can I carry on?
If he hadn't already, which may be giving Sirius way too much grace because, as Remus had said, he played the innocent part well, but Remus also knew he knew what he was doing, and it was very apparent as Sirius turned his head to the side and licked Remus's neck. Remus's hand squeezed his hip, trying to still him or push him further back. He wasn't sure, and Sirius only laughed, tossed his head back and laughed, and Remus groaned because he was one man against Sirius, a force to be reckoned with. Remus knew these weren't disco moves. He didn't understand what disco moves were, but surely not whatever was happening. Sirius just wanted an excuse to grind all over him, which was fine, It was fine, by all means. But couldn't they just do that in the motel room? At home? At a bar? Anywhere else, preferably with The Who playing? Remus loved The Who, had even worn their shirt out to a club. Didn't he deserve that? Then Donna Summers came on, and somehow Lily and James had stayed close enough by that Lily grabbed Sirius to go dance, and Remus looked at James. Then James glanced back at Lily and pinched two fingers together, bringing them to his lips, and Remus sighed. Please. Man, I hate disco, James sighed, lighting the spliff as they leaned against the outside of the bar. I mean, what kind of mood do you even have to be in to listen to that? I've never been like, yes, babe, put on some Donna Summers. Remus took the spliff from him, taking a hit, nodding. Like, how do you even dance to it? Lily dances and looks great, but you can't just throw it on. It's so loud and... Remus handed it back, and James tapped the ash off and inhaled. Loud, and makes me feel like my head is going to explode. Lily goes out with some friends sometimes, and I go sometimes, and, well, you know, I get dressed up, but damn. Remus took the joint again, nodding again in understanding. I'd rather listen to anything else. I mean, hell, put on some Marvin Gaye. And it's fine, but that? James gestured to the club's front doors with his head. Not my scene. Remus was quiet because his heart was fond that at least he wasn't the only person in the world who couldn't stand the genre. The things you do for love, James sighed, shaking his head. You like Disco Man? Loathe it. Right on, James laughed, knocking his shoulder. Sirius was some sort of mix between evil and endearing, torture of the worst kind, and Remus loved to watch his own train wreck as it happened. An out-of-body experience or something close. Sirius was sweaty and had unbuttoned his shirt somewhere between Remus leaving, smoking with James, and coming back inside. Remus felt like he could be drooling, but he wasn't sure and didn't really want to check. The club was dark anyway. He and James found a spot at the bar where they could watch them both, and yeah. Sirius had put a shirt on that evening, but he might as well not have. Remus also knew he had to be hot as ever-loving hell in that leather jacket, because Remus was hot in just his shirt, and there were so many lights and people, and it was a lot. So he and James, successful in their mission to get sufficiently stoned, ordered another round. Sirius's and Lily's were sweating on the bar next to them, but they were both too entranced by their person to bother walking up and letting them know that they had gotten more drinks. Which was fine. Remus was too high to really stare at anything besides Sirius, and he could probably provide any given person with a written and annotated list of the reasons he was a strong, strong man, and then another list, longer than the aforementioned, of reasons why Remus wished he could just lord. He didn't even know. Kiss Sirius right now? Make out? Sweaty and sticky and hot? Touch him? That would be a good start. Fuck him? That would be a fantastic start, and one he would very much like to act on, but his ass was glued to the seat and watching the way Sirius's hair was sticking to his skin. Sticking to his neck, smiling and laughing with Lily, and Remus will give her that. She was giving Sirius a run for his fucking money. Remus didn't know where Sirius got the energy, honestly. Like, he was made of fucking life, and being around all the people and dancing with them, he was just absorbing all of it, and now he was grinding into Lily, and he heard James laugh next to him. And then Lily was grinding into him, and Sirius was giggling, and no, not disco moves at all. And yes, Sirius knew what he was doing. And Remus said that with his whole damn chest because as he finished off his third drink of the night and went to set it back on the bar, Sirius turned and looked at him, his mouth moving as he yelled over the crowd what seemed like a "Mooney!" even though Remus could not hear him before his face turned serious, and that look came over his face. The one that meant trouble. Nothing good ever came from that look, and it was aimed right at Remus, locked and loaded. Lily came behind Sirius, throwing her hands in the air, and Sirius turned to face Remus once more, and he watched as Sirius's hands moved over his chest, dangerously close to his dick, swayed his hips, and it all caught the light, and Remus's mouth was dry. His hands skated over that fucking belt buckle, tease indeed, and then both hands were running over his skin, and it was slick with sweat, and the lights of the room, a mix of blue and purple, were creating some sort of effect where Remus's eyes almost crossed. He watched Sirius's nails ghost over his lower stomach, freshly painted, and Remus was acutely aware of his own matching nails. The part of his lips and the arch of his back against Lily, leaning down and looking at Remus through his lashes as his fingers dipped under his waistband. And Sirius threw his head back against her shoulder, and Remus watched as a few people looked over, eyeing them dancing, and Remus didn't really know what did it. Couldn't tell you. Could maybe give you a few guesses, but the kicker was neither here nor there. Remus got up and clapped James on the shoulder before tossing a "we'll be in the car" over his shoulder, to which James only barked out a rough laugh. Remus walked toward Sirius and watched his eyes light up, a hand coming off his chest, off that Mooney tattoo, and there was about a split second where Remus thought, maybe just sit back down. But then Sirius winked and moved his hand back to his belt buckle, and Remus came to stand in front of him. There was actually no standing. Remus reached around, grabbed Sirius's ass, and hauled him towards the door. Sirius only laughed before throwing himself towards the exit and out of it. He stumbled and pushed his hair away from his face, grinning with wickedness. They hit the night air, and Remus spotted the truck behind the corner of the club and all, but dragged Remus over there, digging in his pockets with his free hand to find the keys. The door to the truck was unlocked and opened, and the key was in the ignition in a split second, which was a stunning display of capability, considering Remus was under the influence. Even more surprising and just plain downright exciting was the fact that as Remus leaned over to jam the keys into the ignition and turn the truck on, Sirius hopped up onto the driver's seat, feet hanging out of the car, which was just perfect, really, because Remus attacked him about a half second after the truck roared to life. "You know what the fuck you're doing," Remus said as he pushed Sirius back on the seat, hearing a laugh escape his throat before Remus's lips pressed roughly to the edge of his jaw. He dragged teeth across the skin, hand coming up to push against Sirius's neck and tilt his head back. And Sirius arched into him, his leg fitting between Remus's where he was leaning outside the truck. Bending his knee, he roughly pressed into where Remus was hard and had been half hard all night, watching Sirius doing whatever the fuck it is he does that makes him so infuriatingly compelling. And whatever had gotten them there in the first place. "Mooney's jealous?" Sirius managed to gasp out as Remus shoved at his jacket, trying to just get it off because it was an obstacle. He huffed as his lips found Sirius's collarbone, biting down, and it caused Sirius's hips to come up once again, in the prettiest whine to leave his mouth as he rubbed his thigh against Remus in his pants. "Yeah." Remus nodded as he finally helped Sirius get the jacket off and tossed it against the passenger side window. "You know what? I am." "Why?" Sirius whispered, but it sounded rough as his hands frantically tried to undo his belt buckle. Remus pushed against his shoulders, keeping Sirius's hands still as he ran his lips down the column of his neck, tasting the sweat and skin and everything he had been staring at all night. And Sirius tasted so sweet, like all the candy and Southern cuts in the world couldn't even begin to compete. "Because you're a fucking tease, and you know it." He knocked away Sirius's hands before he could undo his belt. And I don't like sitting there watching everyone looking at you like they wish they could fuck you. Sirius fought with Remus's hands that were firmly planted on his belt buckle. It was no use, and he shoved them away as he kissed Sirius again, pulled on the buckle, lifting Sirius up and into him, and heard him let out a small gasp. It was sloppy, messy. It was absurd how Sirius tasted like cigarettes still, and sweat, and the sweet drinks they had been drinking all night. It's fucking unbelievable how he opened his mouth to allow Remus in, but Remus didn't give in. He took Sirius's bottom lip between his teeth, biting down so hard he almost felt bad, and then he felt Sirius's hips lift again. His feet grappling and trying to find purchase on the edge of the truck so he could press himself against Remus. It was making Remus delirious, Sirius's lips everywhere, panting and eyes blown like he had been longing for this and couldn't stand it now that he was in the moment, like he knew Remus would give him anything he wanted. Sirius knew exactly where he had Remus. But that wouldn't do. That was too easy. And as much as Remus wanted to give in to everything swimming in his head at the moment, yeah, he had been jealous. But it was him over Sirius right then, and him Sirius wanted. And that whole concept made Remus feel higher than he had ever had in his fucking life. He pressed his lips against Sirius's neck, leaning into him and trying his hardest to soothe the area after he bit down, but he very quickly found he was obsessed with how Sirius's skin felt against his teeth. Soft and pliant, and like Remus was bending it to his every will. He drew back just enough to glance down and see Sirius's chin wet with spit, lips parted and trembling as he took quick breaths. Remus groaned at the sight before Sirius seemed to have had enough. He let his feet fall out of the truck, and Remus nearly died from the loss of pressure against his cock. But now Sirius was lying below him, hands threading into Remus's hair and allowing Remus to just kiss him. Sirius leaned into it, letting Remus tilt and turn and move his head as he pleased, lips unhurried as his fingers skated over Remus's waist. He took a sharp breath against Remus's lips, spoke softly. "You wish you could fuck me?" "I don't think you want to know the answer," Remus huffed, bracing an arm on the seat and lifting to meet his eyes. "To that question." And then the little moment of what could hardly be called tenderness was gone. It's nothing romantic or sweet or anything nice, really. Except it was nice because Remus's tongue was about an inch from literally being down Sirius's throat, and his lips were moving against his, and they were so fucking soft and everything he ever wanted. Sirius's tongue was sliding against his own, and it was clumsy, and maybe Remus, any other time, would have been embarrassed because he could kiss better than whatever this was, but the knocking of teeth only made him harder. Their teeth clashed, and Remus hissed as the feeling sank into his gums. Sirius moaned, made this filthy noise, and licked over the front of Remus's teeth. "You taste like Bud." And he felt Sirius pulled back as their gazes met again. Remus didn't know what he could possibly be seeing in his eyes, but Sirius fought back a lazy smile before bringing Remus's lips to meet his and spitting in his mouth. It was still for a moment in the cab, and all Remus could hear was the laughter and loud voices of those outside the bar, the low static of the radio, and the hum of the car. And then there was the heavy breathing and the sound of Remus's brain boiling over as Sirius captured his bottom lip with his own and pushed his spit into Remus's mouth. Literally swapped spit, and it was somewhere between the second shoe dropping of the night and falling in love for the fourth time. Still, Remus lifted, shoving against Sirius's knees to try and get him to hurry back into the truck, and then they were both in the car, the door slamming shut behind them. There was a moment of panting, Sirius resting on his elbows, shirt wrinkled and lying wrong, unbuttoned and falling off one shoulder. Remus was on his knees in front of him, and Sirius's chin was wet with spit. He could see where it was running down his chin, and hadn't quite made it into Remus's mouth. And he could see it shining in the dim light from the bar outside, and Sirius looked debauched. Like, if you hadn't known, you would have thought he had just been thoroughly and extensively fucked. And that was just the most enticing concept Remus had ever considered. Then everything started up again the moment Remus reached over and turned the radio on. His mouth tasted like Sirius's spit, and he cursed before leaning down again.
Put your loving hand out, baby.
And this time, Sirius was ready and arched so prettily into Remus's chest when he leaned down. His knee came between Sirius's thighs, and Remus's hands were on that fucking belt buckle as Sirius lifted to give him another kiss. He twisted it in his grip, and Sirius threw his head back, nearly missing hitting the door.
Riding high when I was king. Played it hard and fast 'cause I had everything.
And Remus could only think about all the times they had been in the truck while he thought about this exact thing happening. He had never gotten the details down, but was more than happy with what he was being provided. It had always been on the edge of his mind, but Remus never allowed himself to even consider it. Yet here he was with Sirius underneath him, whimpering and moaning and begging.
Walked away, warned me then that easy coming, easy going it would end.
Please. Sirius swallowed hard, stuttering as Remus pressed their foreheads together, watching as Sirius looked at him, eyes dark and dazed, heavy and so fucking beautiful. They were wide and full of that something Remus would chase to the ends of the fucking earth. Please, Moons. That's not my name, Remus whispered against his lips, pulling back just enough so Sirius couldn't kiss him despite arching back and trying desperately. Remus's hand found its way underneath Sirius's waistband, pressing into the skin and dragging across Sirius's stomach. So fucking soft. Tangible proof of the good in the world under his very own fingers. Please. He gripped Sirius's waist harder, running a palm over the Mooney tattoo, and Remus let out a shaky breath. That's not my fucking name. He shoved Sirius's hips into the seat, and it was a beautiful fucking sight. Maybe ethereal or euphoric, even, watching Sirius lose it under him. Fully in his grasp, hips lifting, searching for Remus. Remus, Sirius whined, and it was the most perfect sound he had ever heard, and he needed to hear it again, and again, and again. What do you want? Remus grinned as he shoved his hands under his thighs, pulling Sirius up and into him. But he knew what Sirius wanted, and he'd tease him all day, until his words were jumbled, and there were tears in his eyes. But Remus fully intended on giving him anything he wanted at that moment, and always. Just this one time. Tell me what you want, baby. And Sirius tried to answer, to tell Remus like he didn't already know what Sirius needed by the look in his eyes and the tilt of his hips, now grinding into Remus's thigh, but only let out a breathless gasp. And Remus had half a mind to tell Sirius to get off like that.
I need you to understand that I've tried so hard to be a man.
Tell him that if he wanted anything, he would have to work for it. That they were going to sit there, and Sirius was going to ride his fucking thigh until he came, and then maybe Remus would touch him. But as he looked down, noticing Sirius's flushed skin from where he had been digging into it, and felt his fingers grasping at his shoulders, Remus thought another time. He got Sirius's belt undone, and Remus threaded the leather through the loops, tossing it somewhere wherever the jacket was, and then tried to shove off Sirius's pants.
Got a man you want in the end. Only then can I begin to live again.
Remus could feel Sirius's fingers brushing and knocking into his, both of them desperately trying to get the fucking pants off. Why do your pants have to be so fucking tight? Remus huffed, bringing his hands around to try and tug them off from underneath. What the fuck? I don't know. Sirius shook his head frantically, trying to lift and peel them off. It's awkward in the cab, and Remus banged his elbow, but they managed. They collectively got them far enough down, and Sirius kicked them off, feet hitting the door, and he cursed. They're off. They're off. Please. And then Remus paused, sitting up and settling his hands on his knees. Breathing heavily, his head was a mess looking down at Sirius. He looked a mess. Cheeks flushed and red, hair shoved away from his face, sticking to his skin in other places. Remus could see the rise and fall of his chest and the way his lips were swollen and shining. Sirius looked absolutely wild.
Begging you, won't you put your hand up, baby?
And it was all too much, and he asked because he could not be given this and then have it taken away.
Begging you, put your loving hand up, baby.
Are you sure? Sirius finally gets a leg free, wrapping it around Remus's hip as the other whimper escapes his lips. His fingers find their way into Remus's hair, tugging him down for a kiss. Yes, please, yes. He can only nod. Okay, okay.
Fighting hard to hold my own. No, I just can't make it all alone.
Just whatever Sirius meant to say was cut off by a groan. Deep from his throat, ripped out. It was a mix between a half-choked sob and his name as Remus reached down and took his cock in his hand. Oh, fuck. Okay, fuck. Sirius nodded, head thrown back as he tried to bring Remus closer. Okay, God. You gotta be quiet, Remus muttered as he looked at Sirius's length in his hand. His lips parted, eyes growing heavier before glancing up at Sirius. But you've got a pretty cock.
Hold it on, I can't fall back. Now that big ass ring is a shame.
He was hot in Remus's hand, and holy shit, it was happening. Sirius was below him, and it was happening, and Remus needed to get it together. But Sirius was way ahead of him and started rolling his hips into Remus's hand, shoulders digging into the seats as he looked up at Remus. Mooney, he begged. Move. Fucking do something. What the fuck? Shit. Sorry. Okay. Remus held Sirius's hip down before leaning over his cock and spitting, letting it fall over the tip before he swirled his thumb. You're kidding, he gasped, and Remus glanced up, leaning over and covering his mouth with his hand. Holy shit.
I'm begging you, won't you put your hand up, baby?
You've got to be quiet, Remus reminded him, digging his fingers into Sirius's cheek, resting his chin on top of his hand and looking down into his eyes. He moved his hand, smearing the spit over Sirius's length, and then his cock was slick with Remus's spit, and Remus was painfully hard in his pants, shifting to where he was straddling one of Sirius's thighs. The song faded out, and the next started, and Remus let out a breath of a laugh. He twisted his hand as he brought it up, squeezing a bit tighter around the base, and watched as Sirius's eyes rolled back, and he felt his mouth part under his hand, hot and heavy breaths against Remus's skin.
You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love.
You're gonna be good and be quiet? Remus asked, glancing up and watching a few people walk past the bar through the rapidly fogging windows.
You never take advice. Someday you'll pay the price, I know.
He nodded quickly as Remus quickened his pace, slicking his hand over Sirius's cock before twisting and running his palm over it. He pressed his thumb against the ridge around the tip, watching as Sirius let out a huff of disbelief, arching into Remus's touch. Tell me, he said, and he felt Sirius continue to nod. He lifted his palm, letting him speak, but Sirius only continued to stare at him, wide-eyed, nodding, brows drawn. You gotta tell me, baby, that you're gonna be good. I promise. Remus shoved 2 fingers in Sirius's mouth, pressing down on his tongue as he closed his lips around them. His tongue was slick against Remus's skin as his hips pushed into his hands, matching his pace. Fuck. Look at you. And it was Remus who choked the words out that time, feeling Sirius twitch in his palm. He looked up, watching as a few people started heading towards the truck. His eyes flitted down, spitting on Sirius's cock again, before pulling out his fingers and switching hands. He quickly shoved his other palm over Sirius's mouth, slick, and Remus let out a shaky breath at the sight under him. Sirius was close. Remus could fucking see it, and he wanted to see him come apart and scream his fucking name for the entirety of the world to hear. Remus felt drunk on the heat of their breaths fogging up the windows, intoxicated and wrung out by Sirius looking at him like only Remus could give him what he wanted. Sirius licked his palm. Remus felt his hot tongue graze over the inside of his hand and cursed. But as Sirius got louder, somehow managing to slip a few moans between his fingers, Remus looked up and saw the silhouette of James and Lily exiting the club. James's fucking yellow shirt. "Be quiet," he hissed before removing his hand, reaching over to the radio and turning the volume up as loud as he could spin the small dial. Remus wasn't quick enough, though, and all that could be heard in the truck was Sirius's voice for a brief moment. "Oh, fuck, please. Moon, I'm gonna, please, I wanna come." And then it was all drowned out by Foreigner, of all bands, and Remus glanced up one more time, watching as James pointed towards the truck, and Remus heard him faintly call out his name over the music. He leaned down, pressing his palm against Sirius's mouth, and doubled the pace, keeping Sirius still. "You're going to come, okay?" Sirius nodded, eyes absolutely wrecked. "And you're going to bite down on my hand when you do, because James and Lily are right there." Remus nodded his head towards the window. Sirius's eyes widened even more, and he shifted, pressing his feet into the seat and lifting his hips. "And after you come," Remus's voice was hoarse, eyes pleading, "I'm going to lick my hand clean, but you have to be quiet." Because he was going to make Sirius come, would rip it out of him if he needed to, just to watch Sirius's eyes flutter closed and hear what he sounded like as he came undone under him. And as soon as Remus said the word lick, Sirius reached up, wrapped his hand around Remus's wrist, and flipped his palm over, teeth sinking into the soft flesh on the top of his hand. He let out a loud fuck before he felt Sirius still under him, biting down harder. Remus was sure he would draw blood right before Sirius went slack. His head fell back, his hips stuttered. Eyes fell shut for the briefest of seconds before they opened again, meeting Remus's like he was all he could see in the world. His teeth let up as his hips jerked once, and Remus felt him spill over his hand. And it was the most alluring sight he had ever seen, making Sirius come. The music was loud in the truck, but he could still hear him, the choked groan and muffled cry Sirius let out as Remus let go of his cock, pulling his hand away from his mouth. His hair was wet with sweat, shirt was wrinkled and creased, and Remus leaned back, looking down at him. Pants shoved down, one leg out, and cum had dripped onto the soft dip under his navel, right over that Mooney tattoo. Remus didn't wait a second before bending down, tasting the soft and salty skin as he met Sirius's eyes, gathering it with his tongue before lifting, sucking a finger into his mouth. Fuck, moons. And then another, as Sirius looked on with something akin to fascination in his eyes, short breaths and pants escaping his lips where they were slick with spit and sweat, his hips pressing into the seat, chasing that high that Remus had just given him.